Hello, good people. Welcome to Beyond the Bachelors, the show where we share the stories of people's journeys to and through graduate education and career elevation. I'm your host, Dr. Justin Grimes, a graduate education and career expert who helps individuals figure out what's next for them, next for them beyond the bachelor's. And today, I'm really excited about our topic. We're going to be discussing probably I would say one of the hot button topics in higher education in U.S. society. Just it's a lot said about this. So we're going to talk about how to navigate the ongoing attacks on gender studies, critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And before I get into that, if you're ready to take your career to the next level with the skills, expertise, and credentials you have by your name, then you know that a graduate education is in your future. To help you find a graduate program that will meet your goals and needs, I encourage you to start with you purchasing a copy of my book, 20 Questions to Answer Before You Apply to Graduate School at applytograduateschool.com. And for those of you all who are a little further in advance and you say, I've already got my program picked out, I'm still in this application stage, and I really want to figure out how to hone my story, not just even within a personal statement, but even within an interview. I encourage you to look at one of our online courses. The Personal Statement Advantage program provides you with access to the How to Write a Personal Statement course, which will teach you how to write your personal statement in 90 minutes or less, as well as editing of that document, giving real-time feedback, so that when you present this to a decision maker or group of decision makers, you'll know that you provided the best version and story of your experience and your goals. I'm excited about today's guest. Today, I am going to be joined by Dr. Christian Matheis, who is a veteran higher education administrator and faculty member who will guide us through today's topic. I didn't even clarify how you want me to refer to you. So how do you prefer to be referred to?
Christian's good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, Christian, one of the first questions I ask all people who are part of this is share a little bit about your background and what led you to decide to pursue a graduate degree.
Again, thanks for having me on. It's a surprise. I think it's a surprise. And it was a surprise to me in a lot of ways. And my family, I think they still don't understand why I did this. What led me to pursue a graduate degree? So some of the backstory is I come from poor folk, right? In South Texas, right? So settler colonists who came in there who were farmers, and then immigrants. My dad's a refugee. And this was never in the plan. I thought it was going to work more in community organizing or direct action work. And toward the end of my bachelor's degree, I finished up a bachelor's in psychology at Oregon State. I had applied to a Master of Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies, just sort of thinking, I don't exactly have a big plan, but what had happened was at the end of my undergraduate degree, I realized that what I really was going to thrive in was philosophy. And I thought, okay, I'm not quite done. Like I didn't actually get out of my 4 years what I thought I was going to get. And then all of a sudden, in the last year or so, everything just kind of clicked. And this faculty member who I had met my first term, she ran into me in the student union and she said, hey, what are you doing after you graduate? And I said, well, I've applied to the program. She said, I'd be thrilled to serve as your advisor. And over the course of the next couple of years, she and others, I don't talk in the language of the miraculous a lot, but like just complete miraculous place and time to be at Oregon State working on an MA in applied ethics. And I finished my thesis, defended my thesis a couple of years down the line, and another faculty member stopped me about a week or two after the defense and said, so when are you applying for your PhD program? And I just looked at it. There was these sort of like these figures just put this in my path. And my reaction was just like, I never saw myself in those places. And so had they not intervened, right, which is the case for many people, had these figures not intervened and like took me in, I would not have done it. I would not have thought that. I didn't have the resources you've created for students to make that transition. I mean, if I had had the resources you're putting out there, it might have been a different story, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that old, the faculty member notices you, grabs you. That's all coded by race and gender and all sorts of other things. Who gets picked and not picked. I'm like I said, it was a surprise.
I think this the random aspect of how people find themselves into graduate education is common amongst a lot of people. But what I hear from your story, which I hear from a lot of people that I talk with, which is the ways in which someone sows the idea into you and the importance of that. And so what I tell prospective or aspiring graduate students is, if someone has planted the seed, even if it's just something you heard from me, take full advantage of that opportunity, right? Like, it's not, you don't wake up one day and say, you know what I want to do? A master's degree or a doctoral degree. Like, it begins to be a part of a process, often in which at least one person, thinking about my own research, where I'll explore what motivates individuals to pursue degrees. One of the motivating factors for a lot of people is they had no idea, right? Like, the idea was populated to them, populated in their mind. And they said, you know what, maybe this is something I want to explore. And they decided to go on further with that. But there's usually someone, an impetus, either a moment or a person that causes you to say, this is the thing that I need to go do. For some people, that's family members. For some people, that's a college mentor or a faculty member or a professor in a class, adjunct or full-time or some to that capacity. Or they have an experience, be a part of an association, they went to a conference, something begins to make this moment happen. So I appreciate you sharing that story. And as you went through your career, your collegiate experiences, you obviously had to come to a decision at the point of completing multiple degrees around, now, what am I going to do next in my career? Hence the title of this show, Beyond the Bachelor's. What am I going to do beyond this bachelor's? And you have had a career where you have been in multiple spaces. Mm-hmm. So talk to us a little bit about your experiences navigating through different professional experiences, both as faculty, administrator, researcher, advocate. You've had a lot. So share with us a little bit more about this path.
Yeah, in that moment, these catalysts, right? The people who trigger your imagination to think of yourself as in places you never imagined, right? Mm-hmm. Those moments, like epiphanies, right? There's that language of the miraculous again. Mm-hmm. They when they come out of nowhere and you can suddenly imagine yourself in places you've never been. Those same figures, I mean, there are others, vice provost of student affairs, right? People in what in my day was student leadership and involvement. These figures who had set up for me this view of the academy and then like the public world, the government world, the private world, that those silos don't actually exist and the flows between them are permeable. And so that means that they tried to tell me that it wasn't just an academic degree, right? And it wasn't just a research degree. And so navigating, I mean, I got to kind of think about how to explain this. I was taught to, work as hard as you can for the underdog, right? Mm-hmm. Take the hard path of new challenge. You're going to get the most out of it. I was kind of given these views, these like sets of tools, like how do you look at the world? And what I cared about, what I was early on taught to look for was opportunities to take what I was learning and studying and writing about in terms of injustice, oppression, justice, and liberation, these kind of frames, and find places to make that work. And it wasn't like there's a job in DEI, right? Or there's, or you can only do that if you're in a job where it's in the job description. It was the mentoring I got was to integrate those skills, resources, and my own need to continue to grow into whatever I did. And I feel like I just must have looked like I was out of my mind to some colleagues, right? Like people who were taught, if you get a PhD, you go into the faculty or research world and that's your silo, or admin, right? Or work off campus and connect with community needs. And that was talked out of me early on. So I think for people who are thinking about their future, I want to be able to pass that on and say this idea that your career is a predestined path. It's cool. That might help you with some motivation. You also got to keep, your mind open to possibility, right? Because the probabilities we're handed are going to create some path. The possibilities keep those paths open. And I was taught to live in possibility in that way. So navigating it, I've had to learn multiple skill sets and languages. There is the language of admin, there is the language of faculty, right? There's the language of community, there's the language of government and private sector. And I am not always super good at navigating some of them. But I've had to learn to code switch across those different places, or try to at least. So those are some of the things that come to mind about that.
One of the things you just mentioned is one of the points in the book, which is thinking about what the next opportunity is that you want. Very early on, I asked people to, in the book, answer two important questions. One is, what's your dream salary? Number two is, what is your dream job? When you think about investing time, energy, resources into another degree, what do you want it to look like on the other end? And I appreciate you reminding us that the pathway is not always linear, right? Like there's so many options, because I think people often feel that they're locked into this one path. Even in my own, like you either were choosing administration or you were faculty. And once you made that decision, the faculty in the program really started to mentor, coach, and support you to be able to go through that path. Now, in hindsight, and it's just my perspective, I wasn't one of the faculty members at the time, but I really feel like being able to help students to think through both paths first and give them a bit of a brief understanding enough to say, here's what the realm of possibility is between both paths, and here's how we want to support you to choosing the one you want versus just making a decision early on. And it's very funny to me how many of us have even found ourselves out of higher education administration and went that route, or found ourselves out of faculty, or found ourselves as administrators who then became faculty. I'm thinking about people in my program who just chose such different paths, and they're also passionate and have nonprofits or their own businesses. So it's beautiful to see the way things can come together for people. So I appreciate, that reminder to each of us to, start somewhere, and then let's see where the path takes you after that.
Yeah.
And to me, it's also one of the beauties of graduate education is that it gives you access to opportunity. It can be the unlocking of many doors. And so I hope people who are listening can remember that. Now, you decided to also in your career path become a faculty member. Mm-hmm. What was that decision like? What was that experience like for you? And any advice you would give to people who are thinking about that as a path?
The world that got us to 2025 has a lot of complications, right? Mm-hmm. A couple of centuries or millennia of the academia evolving. One of the most important things I think I'm trying to keep in mind and translate for students is that the stuff that got me here is probably not going to work for them. And mm-hmm. some of it is, right? That the toolkit that their parents and many of their faculty, the toolkit of the elders, right? That those lessons of the elders are important, and they also are not necessarily going to work the same. Mm-hmm. Some version of that was given to me to really think about, like, you can change your mind. You can do some different things. And I don't know. I want to make sure I'm answering or kind of respond to your question. That once I got into a PhD program, I was determined to gain the research credentials to be able to leverage for community work, right? Mm-hmm. There are communities who were facing problems. We turn those into issues. We organize around them. We then collectively draw power from the community to confront those issues and solve them, right? And I thought the PhD research was going to bolster me to go back out of the academy to do that. And then I stayed, mm-hmm. and wanted to stay, I chose to stick around in the academy because it has allowed me to do both. That at some point I didn't have to do either one. And I tried to find places where, like Guilford, for instance, even some of my time at Virginia Tech, where I could spend my time building up community skills and contributing and learning from community, as well as doing more conventional research and teaching. Mm-hmm. And this idea of an either or, it's like the silos of our academic and institutional world. Those mm-hmm. silos are, we have to take them seriously in some ways, and we also have to understand the unreality of them. It's the same for my career. That, I want people to find opportunities, jobs, or whatever we call them. I want people to find opportunities where the things that you thrive in or are good at, and your community, right, that is building people, you can do parts of that in what you do. Mm-hmm. The more that we start telling that story in our application statements, cover letters, the more that we start messaging, I'm a multifaceted person. You don't need to be boxed into this career path that's been conventionally defined. Go back to that first thing. The old toolkits of a career being siloed or a future being siloed won't work for the next generations. I mean, I feel like that's what we want, right? Like mm-hmm. you can thrive at 3 different things without being exhausted. If we set our systems up right, we've got to start telling people that's worth doing, not 3 different gig jobs, maybe, but that you can be really great in admin over there. You can be really great in the classroom over there. You can be great, out in the research, like out in the forest, right? You could do multiple things, but we have to shift that narrative.
Yeah. And, when I think about the future, you have aspiring graduate students that have huge followings on social media.
Yeah, right.
And that was not a reality 15, 20 years ago.
No.
That would have been of any value or asset to institutions. But now they have to think about that. They have to think about, not just even for the student, but even for the department to say, what does it mean when we commit to admitting a student? We're also potentially admitting an entrepreneur. We're also admitting a person who can move and shift cultures. We're also admitting a person with a wealth of experience and knowledge, that the thing that they can either say one tweet, they can send one tweet or say one thing, and it completely disrupts the ways in which academia has historically worked, or things have worked within our given field, because now they have the support from other people. And they're also not feeling reliant in the ways that we used to. Like the path used to be, you have to get these degrees to then be able to go get the job so you can have a living wage and do all these things. And students of today now have, and I'm not limiting student by being of a certain generation. I'm just saying students in general now have multiple paths to create financial opportunities for themselves, where they're not always having to be heavily reliant upon higher education to be the pathway there. That higher education really, to me, is the phrase of fitting school into life. I think undergrad is very much of life is school. But once beyond the bachelor's, everything has to work within life, and more importantly, the type of life that I want to live going forward. And I think this is a good, path to be able to, or a good segue into talking about today's topic around the policies. At the time of this recording, Linda McMahon has been confirmed as the Secretary of Education for the United States. And we have seen the Dear Colleague letter, which presented a lot of information and directives around how institutions should function. I think for me, one of the challenges right now with all the policies that are coming forward, particularly impacting K through 16 and even graduate education and beyond, is the lack of clarity, the lack of definition of terms. As we're talking about critical race theory, as we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's fun. It's baffling to me. People don't want to say the words. It's just, let me just throw the letters right and go forward from there. Because to say them mean I have to define it and it has some meaning behind it. But there's a lot happening in this space, right? And, even before we started, we talked about, tweets that President Trump has sent out around protest, right? Like at the time of this recording, some things were written out about protest. And so I'm curious from your perspective, because I don't think the place that we are now is not random. Even
no.
in my own research, like I don't know if I even share this with a lot of people who would listen to the podcast, but my dissertation research used not only critical race theory, but critical race methodology. So I'm even unpacking and troubling the traditional methods that we use to collect information. And so storytelling is important to me, but I don't think, again, going to your perspective about the linear path, that we always have to tell stories verbally. And so I chose the path of using visual research. More importantly, photo elicitation. So here's a prompt, provide for me, like describe to me both in a verbal and a written format what your response and reaction is to this question that I'm asking you, but also provide me a photo to demonstrate that. For example, what I talk about in mine, because I looked at, why do Black men pursue PhDs in education? One of the things that was very interesting to me, utilizing critical race theory and critical race methodology, was the question that I asked around, describe for me what it means to be a Black male pursuing a doctoral degree. And then I asked people to describe who inspires them, who motivates them, to your point, who supported you towards the decision to decide to pursue this. What was very interesting to me is people's definition, these Black men's definition of a doctor were all Black men. But when I started to unpack and have conversations, interviews, and look at the images, it also reflected that. But another interesting thing came up, which was that individuals who supported them, the mentors, the coaches, all were Black women. So what I concluded was that the path towards graduate education for Black men is often contingent upon Black women being in academic spaces, whether they have to be faculty, custodial workers, groundskeeping, they have some connection to this process. So if you want Black men, you must have Black women in order for this to be able to function. And so thinking about now with critical race theory, with gender studies, with DEI, what signs did we miss? Because some people are feeling very caught off guard in ways that I'm sure you aren't. But I'm curious your perspective. What did we miss that led to this? Before I talk about what we missed, I'm thrilled to hear how I don't think I ever actually really heard how you described that pathway through critical race methodology. And so that's flipping a lot of important switches for me. And, part of that is the reminder that so much of the positive aspects of a society, right, a democracy, at least in the US, the stuff that's been good and good for people, collectively, culturally, institutionally, economically, has rested on Black women and women of color, right? Like, their contributions are disappeared while all of the gains are then, end up in my lap, for instance, right? Like end up in my world. And so it's not just true of Black men getting into PhD programs. That's true of nearly all of our social institutions. That third shift labor, right? Looking after the Black kids in the classroom after you do your service in the department, after you do your research and teaching. So thanks for naming it. It's completely true for me. What did we miss? In a lot of ways, you gave the perfect example. We missed that the story we tell has a method, or the theory has a method. That the language of DEI, language of critical race, the language of gender theory, that becomes the lecture, the TV show quip, right? The language that we use, there's a method there. And so much of that methodology has been backgrounded and suppressed. The predictive abilities, right? I don't want to like kind of play games around like positive statistics, positive statistics, right? We're not gonna reduce everything to quantity and that kind of thing. But the predictive ability of some methods that like critical race methodology are able to tell us not just this is what happened, this is what likely to happen, but there's an urgency there, right? Something that I think we don't take seriously enough is how some research and formal, informal research, right, gives us this alertive sense, right? It doesn't just define things, right? There's the definitive aspect. It doesn't just inform us. It doesn't just justify. It doesn't just critique. It actually puts an urgency on stuff. And if you look at the methodology of
different branches of critical race, different branches of gender theory, different aspects of DEI, which tends to be more administrative in its applications. Mm-hmm. The methods are saying not just, hey, this is important, and we need to do something now to make things better or end up worse. And that alertive mode of research, which then gets labeled as scholar activism when you want to be nice, right? Mm-hmm. Or in my world in philosophy, when you don't want to be nice, someone will sit up in a conference and say to, Naomi Zach, right? The brilliant, prominent philosopher of race. Someone will say to her, and I sat in the room when this happened. Yeah, but how is this philosophy?
Yeah.
Right? Right? How is this research? They try to take the method that's pointing to anything alertive and urgent. And this has been happening to every marginalized scholar for decades. So I think what we missed is we may not have told the story of method carefully enough. I'm not blaming anyone for the attack on us. We're not to blame for the attack. We need to skill up at why these strategies are, informative and justificatory, or but they're also alertive. There's an urgency about Black men getting into PhD programs that our society needs to take seriously out of your research. Do you know what I mean? We have to tell that urgent story, and I think we missed that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And one of the things I think about, how do we take the language that we learn in academic settings, translate them in a way that makes sense to everyday people? Mm-hmm. And so, one of the things I think about now is the ways in which we're seeing white men in these political positions respond and react. Elon, Trump, J.D. Vance, whoever it is, right? Our college presidents, our deans, whoever they are, it's not shocking the types of tweets, the types of comments that we see if you understand the history of white identity development, right? Like if I am putting on my researcher hat or my academic hat, and someone says, I don't understand what makes these particularly white men say these things or do these things.
Yeah.
The academic in me is going to say, you need to look up Helm's white racial identity development model. It will completely explain every single stage. It will explain contact and disintegration, reintegration, and kind of this immersion and autonomy. It'll go through and explain to you. And I'm encouraging people who are listening, go look it up.
Yeah.
Helm's white identity, the racial development model, and Black one as well, to understand and conceive of how we get to the point to where people are in positions of power that can feel so confident and comfortable saying and doing the things that they are. We shouldn't be shocked by some of the policies we see. And I think that, one of the missteps that led to a lot of these things being taken away or being misinterpreted from an academic side is that some people in academia haven't been the best translators. They haven't made it real for people to understand. It's almost as if we separated these two spaces. I give this example of when I was pursuing my doctoral degree at University of Georgia. I tell people there's University of Georgia and there's Athens, and they're not the same.
Yeah.
Athens is the second or third most impoverished city in the state of Georgia. And you think to yourself, the Georgia Bulldogs, the ones who won a championship, is filled with poverty such at a high level? Absolutely. Because Georgia sits in the middle with a gate all around it. And what that communicates is there are certain people who belong in this space, who are protected in this space. If we look at that as kind of a system of our society, there are certain people who belong, and we then use policies to push other people out. And, I think that's a reflective of Athens, which is a community of a bunch of different people. We all live in the community, but we don't experience the community in the same way. And I think, now what we're seeing is policies that are pushing narratives, that are pushing the stories, that are pushing people out of communities and saying, we don't even want to separate the two. We are not going to make it a UGA and an Athens. We're just going to make it all UGA.
Right.
And those who don't identify within that and the rules and the rituals that are associated with that, something is wrong with you. And one of the areas that concerns me is the future of academic freedom. the future of research, the future of grants. And because even the stuff that you have done has been connected to some funding source that then allows the power to be reallocated to the community. So instead of us doing research on people, we're doing research with people. But if you take away the NSF money, you take away the NIH money, you take away affirmative action and other policies, how do we build and make communities better? So I'm curious your perspective around the futures of academic freedom, questioning, protest, these types of things.
I want to take your invitation and reminder to translate, right? The bridge work we have to do. Everything I said before, let me boil it down. I need to teach students, what I try to do, teach students, read what a person is saying, look for what they're doing. There's a difference between the words that somebody is saying and then getting a picture of what they are trying to do. And sometimes those two are integrated in what we might call honesty, right? Or integrity. And sometimes those are disintegrated, which drifts toward propaganda. And so what we are seeing with the attacks on funding is an intent to restore elitism, authoritarianism and elitism. And so the elite means, right, they're a group of people who believe that they come from a better kind of people than everybody else. And because they come from a better kind of people, they deserve to call the shots. And the lesser kind of people have to obey, right? In fact, it's better for the lesser people that the elites are running things. And so what we're seeing is a shift of the integration, intersections of white supremacy, transphobia, heterosexism. We're seeing those things leveraged to renew this neo-elitism, right? This way of saying, not only is it good that I'm in charge, right? It's better for you that I'm in charge. And you probably can't be trusted. You should trust people like me. And so what I'm seeing is this this shift of administrators and faculty who are trying to cope with how underprepared most of us were for the resurgence of elitism and authoritarianism. When I did, after 25 years plus of doing DEI work, right, in corporate settings, public, nonprofit settings, higher ed, and trying to, do workshops and things like that, I didn't raise the language of elitism and authoritarianism. I wish I had. And I wish that I had, and I've taught students over the last 2 years, I wish I had taught them class analysis. Americans predominantly in the dominant majority of cisgender heterosexual white Americans, right? People who look and sound a lot like me, will do just about anything to avoid a class analysis. And so in any case, in that translation work, and I know I deviated from your question a bit.
No, I like it.
That there are skills that were these methods that were built, and they put many of us in the place to be able to make sense of or know what we can't make sense of. And they've been backgrounded or downplayed. It's like we left some of the tools we need at the bottom of the toolbox. We're going to have to polish them off. We're going to have to, get the rust off of them. And one of those is the translation work, is the bridge work. Yeah. So where's the, without the funding, Suzanne Farr, who's one of my mentors in understanding all of this, I learned from her a long time ago, this like catchphrase. It was actually a teacher who assigned me her work before I ever met her. Those who control your money control your politics. And if you don't make deliberate decisions about which aspects of your work will and will not be controlled by that money, that is a skill set that you need to hone now, right? And so we're all going to have to relearn that hard lesson and skill up in ways that mean we filter what we can do without the funding, what we can do with the funding, and we're going to have to rethink this.
And I think that is what is unique about higher education, is that a lot of the skills, a lot of the language that we need, or I won't say we need, a lot of the language that we can use and access and really just kind of problematically work our way through it in what I would say is a safer space in outside of academia. I think that's the beauty of higher education, is that you can do that. You can enter into a graduate program not fully knowing, and then be connected with a classmate whose thoughts about something, whose experience about something, and is completely different and causes you to shift your way of thinking. You can have an immersive experience both in and outside of the classroom that can completely shift policy. That some people forget that a lot of your policymakers started as graduate students. Like that's how we get to a lot of things, right? Like we separate these two, but I like to remind people they're so closely connected. Are there other things that you think that people should be considering or should be strategizing or doing in this moment, whether you're a student or faculty member? Kind of give your advice around how do we go forward? Now we know what's happening. We have these policies, these experiences. How do we go forward?
For students, and I think of a lot of students who are moving or thinking about their bachelor's into graduate programs and bachelor's into opportunities that may or may not be graduate programs. I want to say, I think the sort of crisis of heart that they may see in their mentors, right? Like they're looking at people in student affairs, right? They're looking at administrators and trustees and faculty. This sort of quiet crisis. I keep hearing, well, what do we do, right? Don't be discouraged by the adjustment we're going through. That DEI didn't fail. CRT did not fail. Gender theory or gender abolition models did not fail. What we're seeing is the hard reaction because of their success. Now, all of these models have flaws, right? DEI has been turned in many ways into a corporate neoliberal means to an end, right? It's become a problematic tool in some places. But again, these are not because these things failed. And I think a lot of people in kind of my generation, even older and somewhat younger than me, are reacting as if like the whole project failed, right? No, they uncovered deep flaws in the system. They, that for centuries people have been saying are there. Frederick Douglass, right? Like this, America cannot stand unless it deals with race, right? Like you have to deal with racism or the institution of enslavement in whatever form it takes, like the prison industrial complex. So I want to say to undergrads, like, don't look at us adjusting and think that there aren't solutions. We have to understand that the successes of those models, we now need to build on them, right? That draft that now is under attack, okay, it pushed the buttons and then people are reacting. Now take what we learned from that draft. And from my take, the next thing is we actually have to take some serious lessons from liberatory models out of Africa, right? Decolonizing parts of Africa and decolonizing parts of South America and the rest of the world. That the liberatory discourse and the hard work of decolonization that the United States has not confronted the same way because we're in the middle of the empire. We have to rethink liberation and adopt skills from people who we've mostly been taught are, these like third world others, right? These images of impoverished, unintelligent people. We got to kick that out and grab those lessons and submit ourselves back to the chair in the classroom. I need to go back. I mean, I've told people I need to go back and be a student again because lots of the stuff I thought I was good at, I see where it worked. I also need to get up some new lessons. So those are a couple of pieces that have been on my mind lately.
I love that final point that we all need to go back and be students again. And I think regardless of your educational background or any related identity, we all need to be students again. We need to start from a place of sitting with what we know, accepting what we know may not work in the current times, but there's still information to use from that and figure out a new path forward. I think for some people, sitting down and pausing is good. I think for some people who have found comforts in doing the same things over and over again and defending those ideas, that now find these ideas being challenged in ways they had never expected, that challenge is actually really good. Because out of this types of challenge, new things will come about, new ways to do research and strategize. And my hope is that we'll move to a more collaborative models. I think about Research One flagship institutions or private institutions with a wealth of resources. I think a lot of them are going to have to navigate their budget concerns, their challenges politically, like smaller institutions, like our liberal arts colleges that have to collaborate, that have to have to work with very little but produce very high, outcomes, highly produced outcomes. We are going to have to strategize and work closely together. And speaking of such, before we end today, I wanted to give an opportunity to talk more about what's next for you, particularly the stuff you're doing with refugees. Those who are watching this will see in his title, it says every campus a refuge. And so I want to give space and opportunity for you to talk about the work you're doing with refugee populations, what we really need to also be thinking about for people who are still coming to this country, or the fear and the threat of them being removed. Yeah. Like, what do we need to be thinking about and doing there?
We need to be, this is funny. I'm going to start in a weird way because it's such a serious topic. Sometimes I want to say, do you know that you have rights? I mean, I'll talk more about the work in just a second, but what are the intersections of public, academy, private industry, one of the intersections of these worlds is that we have been so gaslit since Nixon in the 1960s to talk about the rule of law. The rule of law is a phrase and a frame meant to distract us from rights. In a democracy, we can argue about whether democracy is going to be the final, best political model. But in a democracy, rights are more primary, and laws are designed to protect our rights to the extent they can. We actually need to do a better job reminding each other of our rights and the fact that the more people who have more rights, the stronger they are. Mm-hmm. And in work with refugees, one of the reasons why I've made this pivot and this shift, at least for this year, to work more closely. I've been working with Every Campus a Refuge as a faculty member, co-researcher, consultant, is that it's important to me to help strengthen the rights and the protections in the law of those rights for refugees, immigrants, undocumented people, for their own sake, for their own dignity. It's also mine. Those are also yours. These are, if you were born in the United States and you don't see the rights of immigrants and refugees connected to your own, it will be very hard when those rights are stripped away from you. Mm-hmm. The least advantaged in a population is the front line, right, of that particular issue. And so what I do with Every Campus a Refuge is I help them with the monitoring and evaluation, the data collection. Like, what are the ways we're interacting and interfacing between resettlement and campuses? How do we understand that? Create the reports so that funders can see where that money and resources is going, and to build trainings, right? Build this messaging to help administrators, faculty, staff, community members understand the intersection. So what Every Campus Refuge does that is unique in the resettlement sphere is that campuses, a lot of campus personnel and students think, oh, we interact with refugees. Well, what they mean is there are students who have been refugees or faculty who have been refugees. They go to camps and work with people at refugee camps, or, there's a service learning component. Every Campus a Refuge works with institutions to directly welcome and resettle refugees and immigrants and newcomers who have never had a history in higher education, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason why this works so well is that when you get down to the roots of it, deep mission of academia and deep mission of citizenship and refuge are intricately woven. 759 AD, the University of Al-Qarawiyyin is founded in Fez by a woman who is lost. We know her name, but largely lost to time. It's worth looking up. Oldest university on record. Largely the population coming there were people from other places, the other immigrant refugee. So the history of the academy is deeply connected to this. And so what I do is I help try to work with the founder and director, Professor Diabdo, to try and knit these institutions in, brace yourself, I'm going to say it, in an abolition spirit. Yeah. When you listen to the actual story of abolition is first and foremost a creative act. Mm-hmm. It is not dismantling first, it is creating. We are trying to create the integration, an abolitionist, in my view, creation of integration, where the new higher ed and the new resettlement path, or the new, right, those things are stronger and better together. What gets dismantled needed to go. And so I see this work as consistent with abolition.
I love it. And for those of you all who want to learn more about Every Campus a Refuge, please visit their website, everycampusarefuge.org. It's phenomenal the work that's being done. And what I love about it is that, and it really kind of one of the joys of the work that I get to do now is highlighting other things that are happening that are very much connected to academia, academic settings that bring groups of people together. It is the things that we do beyond the bachelor's degree. And so thank you so much for sharing that with us. Again, thank you to our guest, Dr. Christian Matheis, for joining us today on today's episode. And if you want to contact him, I'm going to make sure that I share his information here in the screen for those looking. Please reach out to him via LinkedIn. If you are finding yourself in need of more information, and we threw a lot of terms, academic terms, in here today in today's session, which is not uncommon when you get two academics together having a conversation, and you're saying that was really good, and there's a lot of things that you said, I don't want to learn more about that in my own journey towards graduate education. Please note that we have books, resources, coaching, a lot of different things for you at applytograduateschool.com. Please like, share, and comment if you're watching this on our YouTube channel at Apply to Graduate School. And I hope that you've gained a lot from this. I hope that the important things you take away is be a student. Right now is a unique opportunity to be a student, to be a learner. We're all lifelong learners. And I think now more than ever, as we see constant headlines and tweets and subjects that are written, titles written that don't flush out ideas, that the beauty of being a learner is that you can discover for yourself what actually is happening and then be able to share that amongst other individuals. And for my academic folks, for my working professionals, let's continue to find ways that we can partner and support each other's work. Let's find ways to be better translators, better communicators, better allies, better advocates, utilizing our resources, our time, our energy, and our knowledge to create a world in which we're able to find so that all people can thrive. So that even if the words DEI is removed, if gender studies and racial groups ceremonies are removed, that we can still carry the message forward because we are showing and utilizing our own individual power to be able to move those things forward. Thank you all so much for joining me on today's Beyond the Bachelor's episode. I look forward to more of you hearing things from individuals who have found their paths to and through graduate education. Y'all have a good one. Goodbye.